please.
Right, morning everybody. Welcome to another exciting instalment of the Economic Prosperity Committee. We'll plough through, obviously we've got the public part of the meeting first, where we're just going to update for the benefit of all those millions watching our progress so far on devolution and the things that have changed in the last probably month or 6 weeks since we held this conversation in public, and then we'll move on to discuss some of the finer details off camera, if you like. So we'll go through this early agenda. Minutes of the last meeting held on 18th of March. Any dramas with those? No? Grand. Apologies for absence. I'll say first we've got Jenny and Jenna at the back of the room. If you're spotting strangers and panicking, they're not a threat to national security. They are shadowing Anthony and I in various forms today. So hopefully let me know if anybody's wildly uncomfortable with their presence, but I can vouch for them. Any other apologies, Anthony? No?
Yes, apologies from Councillor Andy Abrahams, Councillor Craig Whitby's intending instead. Councillor John Clark is substituted by Councillor Jenny Hollingsworth, and Councillor Milan Radulovic is being substituted by Councillor Steve Carr, and apologies also from Mel Barrett.
Fab, thank you very much. I think Adrian Smith is on his way. That's speak of the devil. There he is. That's scary. Morning, Adrian. Declarations of interest. Anyone got anything to declare in that regard? No. Great. We'll plough on with first part of the agenda proper. Then we've got a presentation on local area energy plans. Michael Gallagher. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself and bring it in?
Lovely. Thank you very much. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all today. My name is Michael Gallagher. I'm head of Midlands Net Zero Hub, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the work we're doing towards the local area energy planning work that ties in with the devolution deal. So for those of you who haven't met me previously, I've obviously worked with quite a few of you in the room. A little bit of background first. Who are the Midlands Net Zero Hub? Well, we're fully funded by the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and Nottingham City Council act as our accountable body. We've got a regional team covering the whole of the Midlands, and they're supporting the development of energy projects and programmes that line up with the LEP energy strategies that were produced back in 2018 to 2019. And we work in support of the UK Government's commitment to net zero in 2050. Linked in with this, I've been working with Wayne Bex, along with some others who are here today, who's the director of CRES at Nottingham, with the Devolution environmental thread. So there's a tie in there. Generally speaking, we're delivering a range of regional and national programmes. So I've done a quick summary there for you from 3 big retrofit schemes across the region. We've successfully delivered a big skills training programme nationally, working to support the enforcement of MEES in the private rental sector, working to support local authorities to decarbonise their public estate, and we're also bringing to a successful conclusion a programme supporting community groups to develop energy projects in rural areas. So the context for local area energy plan, I think anybody who's working in this space is aware that the system as it stands now is very outdated. It's designed for one-way distribution, so the likes of Ratcliffe upon Soar, a big power plant, pumping power out, and it all goes one way into people's homes and businesses. That has changed considerably over the last decade or so, and it will continue to do so. We also are very aware of climate change. I think today it's quite apt with temperatures escalating quite high, alongside the energy costs that we're currently seeing, and are really causing concern for citizens and businesses. And of course, the energy security challenge, which is at the forefront of our minds with everything that's going on in Russia and Ukraine at the moment. All this means that we need a rapid transformation of our energy system and our transport system. But the cost is estimated to be about 50 billion per year if we're going to achieve net zero. So to implement this at local level, we need to target our interventions quite carefully. And by taking a place-based approach through a local area energy plan, we can make sure that we do this in a cost-effective and fair way. previous LAPes have demonstrated that if we just go down a single vector route, so if we just, for example, go purely to hydrogen, that's a really expensive way, or just to heat pumps, a really expensive way to do it. We've got to look at a good blend of different technologies, making sure they're suitable for the area they're being applied to. So the people we're looking to work with in this first stage have found that you can save about 17% by taking a local area energy plan through. So in one example, that's about 1.3 billion saved. And of course, there's the benefits, you know, socio and economic benefits that we'd expect to see through this sort of work as well. A bit more detail behind what a local area energy plan is. It's essentially a process that we'd look to work through to inform, shape and enable these aspects to transition to the net zero system. So kind of looking at that big picture right down to a granular level. What's key with this and why it's so important that we're involved from a local authority perspective is we need local leadership. There's a huge amount of moving parts to this and the challenges of this systemic change is vast. It can't be underestimated. And of course, you've got to look at who's involved. You know, all our citizens need to be engaged. You've got all our businesses and a host of other organisations who this will impact. So a high quality LAPE will make sure that we've got a good solid foundation to build on when we're making these decisions, which many of you in the room will be involved in. The plan can underpin specific proposals. So if you're looking at an area and what can be done to decarbonise a specific ward, for example, then this can really help to inform all the infrastructure needs that need to be considered and can help funding bits. And the other aspect of this, as you scale up, it's really important that this is done consistently across the localities to make sure that there's a clear line of joined up thinking from a planning perspective. And therefore, when these actions are implemented, they're more effective and better tie into national policy. To put that into picture form, there are two aspects to this slide. There's the general approach and then the process. So in short, we're looking at how we can decarbonise heat and what the future of the gas grid may look like. The importance of place, the importance of taking that whole system approach, so not just looking at one aspect of it, who the key stakeholders are that need to be involved in these decision making, to help develop that big project pipeline, which will of course drive investment and boost skills, jobs, security. And of course, the engagement with consumers and communities, which is so key to this. On the process, I won't go through every step, but what is really important if we produce a local area energy plan is that we use it, we implement it, and that monitor and review, those two last stages are key. The first bit, straightforward. You get the plan produced, but it's then really important that we utilise that to the best benefit of our area. In terms of questions that this work would help answer, so it's looking at how that process starts to transition the system over to a net zero carbon system. It helps us look at how we prioritise which interventions we need to do first. It's the old, how do you eat an elephant one bit at a time sort of approach. You know, we can't do everything, we've got to prioritise. And of course, the big question is which technology should we use? I've sat in a number of different local authority meetings, and there's often the question of, well, do we wait for hydrogen to come in, or do we look at heat pumps? There's no right answer. It is a matter of looking at the blend and going, what can we do now to start the process, and then build on that. And of course, it's also looking at the capacity of the network, both the electrical infrastructure and the gas infrastructure. And of course, there's the district heating element as well, to work out the best route. And of course, the big one, which everybody is really keen on, the cost. How much is this actually going to cost us to do to reach net zero? And what are the different scenarios? Because, you know, some will cost less than others. And critically, and I think this is a really important point, the citizens. What are the impacts going to be on them, and how do we engage them and keep them on board as we work through this process? So in summary, for the LAPE, uses a whole system approach to provide a complete plan. And we can do this for D2 and N2 to reach net zero. It stimulates a range of pathways to reach it and identifies the most cost-effective route. Identifies the low regret options to prioritise which projects we do first. There are other local authorities who are already doing this or have done this work. So, for example, GMCA have gone through the process, North Yorkshire, Staffordshire, Warrington, Peterborough. There are others, so we can look to those for case studies and good practice. And it is also important to flag, we can create smaller boundaries within this. So we can look at it at a LAP level, but we can also break that down to district. There may be times when it's advantageous to bring a couple of districts together for the economy of scale, particularly if there's lower populations in those districts. But it is throughout this important to try and maintain that economy of scale while getting that detail at the local level. So in terms of next steps, we've got funding secured to conduct a socio-economic benefits report, and I'm hoping the contract will be going over to the Energy Systems Catapult for this today to do this work. And essentially it will do a few key things: provide that high-level assessment of the socio-economic benefits that can be delivered through a LAPE, targeting the data, so there are 4 strands there: housing retrofit, of which there's a huge amount going on across the county at the moment; fuel poverty; EV deployment, so electric vehicles, and renewable generation deployment. So all this will be collated and reviewed, and these categories will then be assessed, monitoring values placed against them, looking at improved health, well-being, comfort, job creation, carbon savings, and air quality, all of which are absolutely key strands to the work we're doing. We'll make sure that there's a clear benefits assessment for Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, and then aggregating that data up to a county level where we can. And ultimately, we'll have that aim then to evidence the values of regional decarbonisation through this LAPE to make sure that there's support for the D2N2 East Midlands Combined Authority devolution bid. So from the hub perspective, we're contracting and we'll project manage Energy Systems Catapult to do this work. So we're happy to take that action, and we've got it in motion. And then once we've got this report completed, assuming it is a satisfactory outcome, then funding will need to be identified. We'd expect at a LAP level this to cost circa £1 million. We would need to obviously go through a suitable procurement route and identify funding. There would be options to look for pathfinder authorities to go first, but it's really important if we take that approach, we make sure we do it in a way that we can keep the consistency with how this is done, which links back to the importance of how we approach it from a procurement point of view. Thank you for your time. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Michael. That was really helpful. It strikes me, and we talked obviously in the room in the context of devolution about a joined up kind of green environmental energy planning process, and this potentially is a way to bring that together, perhaps as a bit of a precursor or early strategy to help our cause in terms of trying to draw things down from government from that perspective, if we can evidence what we're going to do with it, whether it's cash or powers from that perspective, whether in negotiation or later under combined authority. Am I right in thinking, Michael, that so that early report work is already starting, so contracts happening now? Is that happening on a D2N2 footprint?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I've had all the approvals through. The contract has been written. I will be, when I get home, I'll be sending that contract over to the Energy System Catapult, who are engaging for this initial piece of work.
And what's the timescales on that, do you think?
They estimate it to be approximately 2 months. They're looking to start in July, but I've got an initial engagement meeting with them next week. Okay,
and we'll be asked to consider that and then look at effectively whether we want to progress that to a bigger, longer-term strategy.
Yes.
Okay. Has anyone got any further thoughts or questions for Michael? Matt?
Thank you. I can see the merit of having something like this for helping us define how we deal with existing uses of energy and how we can change that. But one of the things that's baffled me for a long time is why we're still building new builds without solar and without environmentally friendly heating systems, and why we're still building industrial units without solar panels on the roof as standard. And I think that should be addressed at a national picture as part of building regs at a national side of things. And so I'm just curious how this would help lobby a national picture change and also cope with any national picture changes that come in.
That's a really interesting question there, because there's a tie-in. So some of this does need to be driven from a national level. There's already been some work done looking at SDPs on what can be done to encourage and incentivise solar PV on new builds, for example. The important aspect of this work is it will demonstrate the importance of that transition and looking at that hard infrastructure that needs to be in place. So, for example, if you're looking at a new build site, you may get pushback from the planner saying, you know, the cost of adding that extra grid capacity to put in things like EV chargers and solar PV, energy storage, could further increase the costs for them as the developer. So by putting this plan in place, you can clearly identify what the best technologies are in a certain area that's suitable. So it could be actually, it makes sense for them to connect to the district heat network instead of paying for increased costs for the electrical distribution, but in others it does make sense because air source heat pumps are the better answer. So it can help inform it from that hard infrastructure perspective. But it does need to link into those other bigger pieces of work that need to be done at that national level, and this can help build the case for it.
Just in terms of devolved powers, I don't know whether Adrian or Sajida might be best placed or whether we've got to that stage yet, but when we're talking about those kind of requirements in terms of environmental standards around planning, is that something that we're able to talk to government about in terms of setting that local strategy and requirement?
I certainly think so. I think given that the planning bill is going through as part of the levelling up process, then it's certainly worth us raising that with our government colleagues when we meet them. So I certainly wrote it down as you spoke.
David.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the work that you're doing on our behalf. I think this topic really makes a big argument for what we're trying to do with devolution, because we're all doing things in our own authorities. We're all pleased with different things in our own authorities, but actually, couldn't we do a whole lot more if we work together? And we could really be a leading area for the country in this vital area of work. I was pleased to welcome coaches to our new bus station in Nottingham this week, and it's been a long time coming, but you know, it is powered by solar panels all the way across the roof of a car park and a bus station, and it's something we've been able to do, and it has been, we are now pushing in terms of planning, but there are things that we can all do in a greater way. I think for our citizens, selling this message is easy to some, but not so easy to others, and we need to make the connection between taking measures to protect the climate and household income. So where people are getting a retrofitted house, it rapidly changes their fuel outgoings, and we're doing it not just in social housing but in private housing in the city, but you know, hundreds rather than the tens of thousands that we'd like to do. And you know, if we could really get government to back this in a big way in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, I think it could revolutionise fuel poverty across our region, because there are lots of our citizens, I don't know about you, who are really worried about how they're going to pay the bills, particularly in the autumn. I think the other thing is great to have public transport systems, but most people still have to have a car. So this time last week I had an argument with a lorry with my car and I didn't win. So as the likelihood of my car being written off is realised, I'm thinking about what do I do next? You know, could I manage without a car? Well, yeah, probably in the city it could, just about. But if I'm travelling to see elderly parents in Suffolk, no, not really. You know, that's not really very practical. Could I have an electric car? Well, yeah, maybe, but on a terrace street there is no way of charging it without trailing a wire across the pavement and tripping all my neighbours up. So maybe a hybrid, maybe that's a possibility. But those questions are real, and we need to make the answer yes for our citizens to make that choice, not only for the environment, but for their personal budgets. And we're not yet at the stage where we can answer yes to all those questions. But I think within the devolution, there is a possibility of answering yes to more of those questions. Sorry, Michael, that's not really a question. That's a bit of a rant.
It's relevant though, because all the districts and boroughs across D2N2 have received funding for retrofit, and what the advantage of doing a piece of work like this, it can help further target what we can do in certain areas, and perhaps make the way we approach retrofit even more efficient. So it can certainly help answer some of the things you flagged.
Thanks. I'd hope that if you can show the broad buy-in across the whole region from that perspective into a shared strategy, it certainly help you make the case to be able to bring those things forward, whether it's funds or the ability to drive any of that change. You would certainly hope so, wouldn't you, Sajida?
Mine's not a question either. Mine's more just a statement in the sense, actually, firstly, Michael and the team have done some great work under the banner of the Midlands Net Zero Hub, clearly for all of us. Obviously, they're employed by ourselves and work very closely with our city, but on behalf of the whole region. But they're recognised nationally as being leading in this space. We're seen as a leading region through the work of the Net Zero Hub, and connecting that into the devolution deal and building on that with all of the the context that we've agreed here around how can we do more, how can we do it at scale, because I think the scale will allow us to really have that transformation. So where we've got best practice in some areas, how can the devolution deal allow us to amplify that and have a conversation to look at, retrofit, for example, to decarbonise existing stock, a huge cost, and to do that at scale is the only way we're going to really make a dent in terms of the impact that could have linked to fuel poverty and all of the other benefits that it brings, not just from an environmental perspective. So on the deal itself, I know we'll come on to it in the second part of the conversation, but specifically with regards to the environmental strand, we've identified leads for each of the strands, and Wayne Bexton within my directorate, who Michael works with, is going to lead that. So kind of building on all the work that we're doing here, building on the great work that's already happening, hopefully we can make that stronger case around how the devolution deal can help us to accelerate and do more, because we're doing some great stuff already. How can we take it to the next level through a devolution deal? And I think that will be really important over the coming months.
Thanks, Gina. It's really helpful. Steve, next.
I've just gone down from 2 cars to 1, and I fully recommend a hybrid. I get about 550 miles from 1 tank full of petrol, and it's brilliant. I would to mention about, fully agree with the gentleman over here who said, I can't understand either why we're not, insisting that new houses have got solar panels, air source pumps, whatever it is. And I don't think the answer's a special planning document, because, we have to bear in mind that out of D2N2, only 2 of those authorities are actually planning authorities. The boroughs and the districts are the planning authorities. So the chance there would be that we're all doing different things if we have individuals planning, special planning documents. I think the answer is it has to be in the policy framework, the national policy framework. And, if we can get that message across to government, then that's fine. But you've got to include all the local planning authorities, because 2 of the D2N2, as I've said, aren't whole planning authorities.
Thanks, Steve. And we'll come on to governance, but we've certainly made that commitment to make sure all districts and boroughs are engaged in those decisions as well as conversations when it comes to planning. So absolutely take that forward. I think in terms of national reform, you've probably seen the second reading of the planning levelling up bill, as it's known, but includes planning, has come forward. And whilst the bill itself isn't mega detailed, it will be backed up by changes and reform to the MPPF as well. So we'll see the detail of that in the next few weeks and months, I would have thought. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Michael? Or?
I mean, just right, this is bigger than just looking at the planning side of it. It's looking at the whole energy infrastructure requirements. And I think this is why it's so important, because everything is interlinked. You look at a house and the planning that's required, and we can encourage, and we should encourage, PV, renewables, battery storage. But then you look at EV infrastructure, looking at charging points. Do we need an EV charging point at every house? Or actually, do we need more centralised charging infrastructure, or a combination of the two? And that links on to what benefits will that have on health and air quality. If you're removing boilers from site and having some form of electric heating as well. There's so many different aspects to this: health and well-being, transport, housing, jobs, the environment, the economy, and so on. This is going to try and pull everything together and then sell that big investment piece, hopefully, that we can really use to attract funding, but also get your big infrastructure players on board, your DNOs, WPD, CADE, and so on, to really understand how we can make essentially the place that we live and our citizens live a better place to be and fit for the future, while obviously supporting the net zero targets that we've got locally as well as nationally.
Thank you very much. Matt?
Yeah, just to come back on a few of the points. I don't actually, for me, think this is a planning issue. We don't have levels of insulation and double glazing quality as a planning issue. It's a building regs issue, and I think it should be dealt with through the building regs rather than planning. Now, if we can use planning as a way to circumvent it at a devolve level, fine. But, you know, I do think it should be dealt with via that mechanism. But also, just going back to the case for devolution, one of the frustrations that I have around wanting to retrofit council stock initially is, my understanding from what I've been told anyway, is that if we make an improvement to reduce the carbon and energy use of a property, we have to immediately pass on that saving to the tenant. They gain the benefit immediately. And from my point of view, to allow us to accelerate and make this a more sustainable way forward, I would rather us be enabled to increase the rent proportionally, because these sorts of improvements generally have a sort of 10-year payback period. And if we could do that so that the tenant is left cost neutral and protected from any energy price increases, but we're able to service the debt to go out and do this en masse, we could accelerate this far more. And I do wonder whether there is then a broader scheme of looking at whether this is something that we could apply to private houses as well, and have debt service through council tax payments as a national system. That might be a step too far, but I think it's worth looking at, so that any investment in the property, the payback stays with the property, and there's no headaches and awkwardness of passing on loans and things like that. So I think there's a lot we could do better here, and if devolution allows us to accelerate that and be a pilot programme for that locally, great. But I do think the national government should be taking this sort of stuff a lot more seriously than it is.
Well, as I say, we'll see what comes forward in the MPFF and the reforms over the coming weeks in terms of national policy. But from our perspective, on a local level, certainly interesting things to take forward as we look at that strategy. So Adrian nodded his head over there as you were speaking. So, Sajida, if you guys in the city are leading on this piece of work, so it'd be probably that conversation at some stage would be helpful. Simon.
Yes, Mike, just a quick one. Does your work reflect the power station at Redcliffe-on-Soar at all, in terms of its life cycle and its contribution to the environment, which probably outnumbers 3 times what we're talking about here at the moment?
It's a big piece of infrastructure. So as you look at a local area energy plan for our region, all the power stations and the infrastructure that's there would certainly be taken into consideration and likely be seen as already, I think, been flagged as a great opportunity actually to transition because, like I said, the wires and cables are there and it would be a shame to miss out and not fully utilise that capacity that's available because one of the biggest barriers that's faced across the country is the ability to connect generation to the grid at a local level. And we have 3 big opportunities across Nottinghamshire alone to take advantage of. So they would certainly be remiss not to include them, and they would be fully encouraged to include them, yes.
Thank you. A great opportunity to tell the story, I think, the power stations as well, because it's really kind of poetic in a way, isn't it? The coal power to future-facing energy. A great opportunity to explain what we're doing as well, I think. Any further questions for Michael? No? Fab. Well, in that case, looking at the report, it asks us to obviously note the contents of the conversation and to decide whether there are further actions we want to take, recognising that there's a piece of work about to get underway. It's going to take us probably through into the autumn, by the sounds of it, Michael?
September time, I'd expect.
Okay, so in my head, it makes sense for us to... it sounds like we're in agreement that this is something we're interested in, and then to note the report and come back for that progress as and when we've got more information. David?
Sorry to jump in late, but the government have asked us on the devolution what other powers we would want. And I just wondered if there are specific powers that would be helpful in terms of taking this agenda forward across Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, because I think we're right. I think other people have said it. We could be the country's leading area on this if we got the right powers and the ability to do that.
That is a very good question. Do you know the answer, Michael?
It's a big, big question. It's one I think we'll get some of the answers through this work, and I'll pick up that conversation with Wayne as opposed to providing a half answer now, if that's okay. I'd like to have all the evidence base backed up before we push. But also, I mean, the big thing I'm confident though is the funding element and being able to make the real case to attract that funding and investment into the region. And then that will hopefully tell some of the story and the powers that would benefit and enable us to do that.
Thank you very much. It'd be really helpful to go away behind the scenes and have that discussion, obviously not least as we go, and with government as well, as we have those meetings over the coming months to understand what's on offer from their perspective, how that ties into all of this. So that would be hugely helpful. So if colleagues are happy then to kind of note our progress and interest in this, and we'll come back to it when we've got that initial report to have a look at. In the meantime, challenge everybody behind the scenes to go and pull some of those answers together. That would be really helpful. All right, I don't expect you to vote on noting that, do we? We'll survive. Great, thank you, Michael. That's really helpful. You may leave. Raise your hand, go quietly. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Really helpful. Right, so we'll move on then to our joint devolution programme update. And obviously we're going to look at governance in more detail in the next part of the session. So we'll go through the basics of that and the things that we've kind of agreed and discussed up to now. Anthony, are you going to do that?
Thank you, Chair. Morning, colleagues. I'll go straight to paragraph 7 and 8, which talks about the commitment that we've received from government recently to the devolution proposals that we're all pulling together between us and councils in Derby and Derbyshire. We've had some good feedback from government. I know that the Chair will want to add to that from the conversations he's had with Neil O'Brien subsequent to Neil's letter in May. But you can see that alongside the warm words, there's now an emerging timetable for this, which includes penciled in date of elections in May 2024. Moving through the report on that theme, you can see that we've also got a negotiating approach where we know which colleagues from the footprint, the Derby, Derbyshire, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire councils will face off to government to negotiate the various aspects of the deal. And you can see from figure 1 on page 11 of your pack, page 3 of the report, that government have broken down that timetable into a series of focused discussions on the main tenets of the deal. So that's the core elements of the deal. And those elements you will find in every other devolution deal that's been done thus far, whether it's transport, housing and planning, skills, net zero. Those are things that government are very used to putting into devolution deals, and they will work through those across the summer into the early autumn with the plan of concluding that element of the deal, which is probably best described as the deal document, sometime in the middle of this autumn. Clearly that timetable will be influenced by how those discussions go and capacity in government and so on. But the plan is set out in that table on page 3 to get us to the point where we conclude the deal document in the autumn of this year, and we can start then to think about how we consult with the public about their views in respect of what we're trying to achieve here, not just in terms of the global approach of bringing more powers and resources into the area, but what that might mean for them in terms of transport, connectivity, access to skills, our approach to net zero. So we're working as a group of colleagues behind the scenes with our communications teams to think about how we might shape that communication and consultation with the public. So it starts now, drip feeding some of those messages into the public domain so that people are warmed up to our devolution deal and ambitions. In the meantime, we're equally working amongst officers and with political leaders to make sure that we go at the pace of all the councils. In that respect, we are thinking very carefully about the difference between the core elements of the deal, the bits that in truth we can, for want of a better phrase, cut and paste from devolution deals that have gone before us, and those things which are a bit different and a bit novel in respect of the devolution proposals that we put forward, firstly here in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, and now together with our Derby and Derbyshire colleagues. So there's a separate conversation ongoing with government about what they now term as the off-framework elements, and those include things like activities for young people, community safety and cohesion, arrangements, domestic violence, that kind of thing. So they might be on a slower burn, and it's difficult at the moment to set out how they might feature in a deal document, but we haven't given up on them because they're, to some degree, the things that will, alongside the very real benefits of the core elements of the deal, catch the attention, I think, of our stakeholders and our partners, and to a greater or lesser extent, the public. So all of that is set out in paragraphs 12 and 13 of the report, and you can also see in those paragraphs, particularly paragraph 11, how we intend to work with you as an Economic Prosperity Committee, but also with the wider cohort of political leaders, the 19 leaders that represent all the councils that have an interest in this deal. Never mind the fact that the deal will officially be done. We know from the reading of the legislation that's just gone through Parliament with the 2 cities and the 2 counties, our ambition is to make sure that all councils are included in this. There was in the diary a meeting with all 19 leaders scheduled to be chaired by Elizabeth Fagan on the 21st of June. We've had some difficulty getting everyone together at that time, so there will be a revised date coming into your calendar very soon. I'm in touch with Elizabeth. The agenda for that meeting was decided at the previous meeting. It will be to talk through governance, communications, and have an update on the Development Corporation, but more news on that when we've got a revised date. Moving on with the report itself, you can see in paragraph 15 that as well as doing all of that work with government and within our cohort, so politically and at an officer level, we're also thinking really carefully about how we might programme manage this and have sufficient resource to keep pace with the work. The fact is the negotiations with government are, he says famous last words and touching wood, relatively straightforward because those core elements of the deal have been done before elsewhere. And the money and the resources that are on offer, we have stressed to government, must be similar to the deals that have gone before us, including the all-important investment pot. Now, where the investment pot fits in that negotiating timetable is yet to be determined, but the point I'm trying to make is we need to have the capacity to keep pace with that. The elements that involve us working with government are more or less straightforward, depending on whether they've been done before. The elements related to how we work with each other, the governance, the finer details of that, consulting with the public, building a combined authority which will have to have its own structure, its own rules, its own operating arrangements, how we keep our stakeholders engaged, that will require capacity and resource. And you can see in paragraph 15 that we're going to write all of that down into one overarching document, a plan, so that this group and the wider group of leaders across the patch can see how we intend to go about this devolution deal, not just from the perspective of how we negotiate it, but how we engage each other, how we keep the show on the road, and how we make sure we cover all the bases. There is increasing interest from our stakeholders in this. Some of us met with the universities earlier this week, and some of us are presenting to a wider forum of universities and stakeholders next Monday evening. We've got FE, colleges interested in this. I recently presented to the Chief Officers Forum. So we're now starting to get people reaching into the deal arrangements, asking how they can interface with us, what they can contribute. We just heard from Michael. Once you start something like this, it tends to grow legs, and we need to make sure that we keep pace with that. So the document before you sets out how we intend to do that, including bringing in some external resource to make sure that the programme management and the expertise that we need is on tap for as long as we need it. At some point, we'll be able to tell you what that external resource looks like. We can't do that yet. We haven't finished the process. We're also, as you can see from paragraph 17, learning from other devolution areas that have gone before us, and the government have told us the ones that are most like us. They're set out in the paper, particularly Greater Manchester, West Midlands Combined Authorities. We've got a relationship with them. We'll also reach out to the West Yorkshire deal as well, because that's got some similarities to what we're trying to achieve. You can see, as I said earlier, we've got an approach also to making sure that those off-framework topics, we maintain the momentum on those, and we've had good discussions recently with colleagues at DCMS. We're working with the respective Safer Nottinghamshire Board and the Nottingham City Crime and Drugs Partnership with Lord Vernon Coker to get a sense of how community safety and cohesion could feature in the deal, and we've got work underway through Kath Marriott from Rushcliffe to look at the climate change aspects of the deal as well, so that we get everybody's view, because I think this thing will be strengthened by getting as much contribution from as many sources as possible, because although we'll do the deal in principle in the autumn, the deal itself, of course, could be built iteratively over a number of years and will stay in place, hopefully, for decades to come. So we want to start off as we mean to go on. The report also talks about governance, and we're going to come back to that on the rising of this meeting, but we are developing, we think, some governance proposals and principles that meaningfully include all councils. The report also covers resources. You can see that although we set some money aside last year from our rates pool, because there's been a lag in recruiting people to the team, and great credit to Hannah and colleagues, we've got people in the team now. We have underspent. That money goes back into the rates pool. We can use it for something else, or we can use it for devolution. That's in your gift, because the rates pool is determined by the EPC. But for now, we've got enough resource to manage the work, even though we'll need to build that over time, and we've underspent on the allocation from last year, which is good news because it can go back into the pot. And then lastly, Ben, the report concludes with some recommendations where we're asking the committee to note the progress we've made on the deal so far, and no doubt colleagues will chip in with their perspective of progress, which is, from my seat, exceptionally good. To note the ongoing discussions across the wider footprint, and that rearranged meeting that Elizabeth will chair will drop into your diaries very soon, and then agree to the rather prosaic next steps that are set out on in paragraph 27, which is carry on with these political discussions, agree a communications plan with the wider leaders board to work up that governance arrangement so that everybody's comfortable with it as quickly as possible, and to make sure that everybody's pitching in to the negotiating approach and those off-framework asks and the wider community and conventions that we're building around our devolution deal, so that it involves as many voices as possible. So back to you.
Thanks, Anthony. Hopefully, given the context of the kind of public presentation of this, I suppose there's nothing in here that is of a massive surprise to anybody at this stage. So should all be fairly straightforward. But I think from my perspective, I'd just add that met with the Minister, Neil O'Brien, last week, who's been really happy with our engagement. And I have to say, from where I sit, the work on this, the collaboration and the atmosphere around it all has been excellent. So thank you all for that. And you'll have seen that he's endorsed us and our bid and our progress publicly in our media and local media last week, which again I think is helpful. And from, again, the legislative perspective, because the bill will go through the House, that we need to enable this in the coming months, our MPs across the Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire area are on board as well from that perspective, which is also really helpful. And we've just arranged a date for the 4 city and county leaders to go down and brief them further and hopefully engage them to go and batter on the door of the Treasury on our behalf in the coming months as well. So that's all I would add. Has anyone got anything further to add, David?
So it's helpful summary, I think. I think the communication plan, which presumably that's not 21st of June now, that'll be the rearranged date. We rearrange it, David, yeah. I still think that we have some work to do to get the message out about the benefits of this to ordinary people. So I was interviewed by a local radio station this week, and after the 4th question about what the mayor would cost people and how much more money it could charge, I was getting rather tired of that question when there were so many more questions that could be answered. But I think it shows that if our local media are not yet understanding what huge benefits this could give, then what hope have ordinary people in the street got? Another politician, another bureaucracy layer. We've got to get through that and tell people what this is about. And I'd like to have 5 things that I could say when I talk to people on the doorstep. It's going to be about getting our fair share. It is going to be about revolutionising the adult skills world so that if people want to retrain, they don't have that decision made about what course they could do in Whitehall. It's going to be made somewhere here and it's going to be available. But I'm not sure what the other 3 are. I think we could make them up. You know, the environment is one. But being clear about what they are so that we can talk to people, I think is something that a communication plan needs to kind of knock into shape in terms of on the street, ordinary people, what benefits this could, because otherwise there's going to be a wave of disinterest in it rather than seeing this as I see it, which is a way for us actually being able to do the things we need to do in our authorities, which we haven't been able to do because the money's been going elsewhere, basically.
Thanks, David. I think, and I hope that we'd be able to articulate some of that at a high level in terms of themes and opportunities at the minute. And as I fully agree with what you said about trying to make that local and personal to people in terms of those improvements to their lives and opportunities. I think that probably becomes easier as we go through the negotiation and understand specifically what powers and funds we'll have. And we talked last week anyway about taking that comms plan and distilling it down into some of those messages, which I think will be really helpful. It's worth reiterating, I think, as we are in this public forum, that government has committed funds to manage the administration of some of this, and we obviously already spend, just as a county council alone, £250,000 a year on the LEP that we won't need to spend going forward. So there's very much the potential for this to be cost neutral from that administrative perspective. So we'll work through all of that, but I don't think it needs to be that huge bureaucracy, and much of that is down to us to decide and manage. So we can work through all of that. And we've done the cost benefit analysis, of course, that talks about the £13-14 for every pound of administration that we spend, which should be out there more. We should promote more as well, I think, from that perspective. Anybody else got anything to add? Steve?
Just something that entered my mind about this meeting that we should have been having next week. That will include Derbyshire leaders, will it? That's fine, but I think what we have to bear in mind is that Derbyshire leaders are in a different place at the moment to where we are. I think they're probably in the mindset that we were 12 months ago. Some of us, not including myself, were quite hostile to this idea. And reading some of the comments from my party colleagues who are councillors in Derbyshire, they seem to be at that juncture. And I'm just a bit concerned that meeting will turn into a bit of a step back for us, because I think a lot of us have moved on from the hostility to actually cautious support. And I would hate that meeting to be full of people who are quite negative about it, because we've moved on from that.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and obviously we've raised in this meeting a few times about, I think we are in a different place to Derby and Derbyshire. We've been doing this for quite a while, but we did have a previous meeting with all 19 leaders that was pretty supportive, I have to say, with the usual and well understood, I think, from our perspective, criteria around engagement, and from districts and boroughs in particular, what say we're going to have, what influence we're going to have, but there wasn't really any outspoken anti views at those meetings. Not everybody spoke, worth saying, but it's worth being aware of. And I think there's been a lot of work gone on behind the scenes just to try and bring everybody to the same level, which is why I think it's important that some of those conversations happen at that forum with everybody involved. Otherwise, we end up in a two-tier kind of or two-speed system, don't we, from that perspective? So we do need to go on this together. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that, Anthony.
Only to say in supplement that the chief executives have met as well. Councillor Carr, all 19, I chaired a meeting probably about 3 weeks ago after the first joint leaders meeting, and it was very positive. So behind the scenes there's a lot of work going on, I think, to get all leaders up to the same level of information and knowledge and understanding that our colleagues are, and that group will meet now regularly prior to the joint leaders meetings to make sure that chief execs have got all the information they need to brief their leaders, so that we have a constructive conversation. Although I would echo what the chair has just said, the previous meeting with all the leaders was really very positive. On the benefits realisation issue, I couldn't agree more, Councillor Mellon. I shall repeat the phrase, back in 2016, but not for much longer. We were dogged by this challenge of being able to describe the benefits of devolution for the average resident. And this time around, we've got to do better at that. If we just talk about GVA or several thousand jobs or umpteen thousand houses, it turns people off, apart from the fact that I'm not entirely sure I understand the definition of GVA, and I'm sure most people don't either. What I've been thinking about is how we might draw up some case studies. Let's say you're a 15-year-old young person who wants to stay in Nottinghamshire, doesn't necessarily want to go away to university, but wants to get a job, which is as good as a job you might get if you went away to university and you come back, but at the moment you can't get the training in skills that you need as an apprentice to get a job at that level. And even if you could get a job at that level, you can't get there because the transport infrastructure doesn't support it. And you want to buy a new house, which is currently not affordable to you. How can we use the devolution deal to make more affordable housing available to you and make sure it's got a low carbon footprint? I think if we start working up some case studies of what it might mean to different sorts of residents in our communities, it might just give us those elevator key messages that we currently don't have. I'm happy to acknowledge that we don't have those. So I'm going to work with the communications group. I think we've already got one of the chief executives who's going to lead on communications. So following this meeting, I'll have a conversation with them to work with that group to see whether by the time we get to the next joint leaders meeting, or 19, we can exemplify some of this in those terms, case studies, so we can hone down on what it might mean for different types of people in 5, 10 or 15 years' time.
Thanks, Anthony. Anyone further on this? No? That was quick and easy. Great, okay, well, we'll move on to the recommendations then in that case, which Anthony's touched on. Obviously to note progress and ongoing discussions in regards to the next steps. So progress political discussions, obviously that meeting is no longer the 21st, but we'll come back with new dates for that and communications plan going forward. We are about to talk about governance shortly, and that work is ongoing behind the scenes, and obviously to continue to work collaboratively, not least on the joint work programme and everybody's roles within that. We should probably vote on that. So all in favour of those recommendations? I'm assuming that's a supportive vote. David, is it over there? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Great, that's carried unanimously. Very good. All right. So I think that actually brings us to the end of this part of the meeting. So thanks very much, everybody, and we'll move into the informal part. So if we can...
If we could stop the broadcast, please.